Human beings have always looked up to watch the weather, to follow the stars, to search for signs, and sometimes to fear. Across cultures and centuries, stories have emerged of enormous winged creatures crossing the sky. Some are said to bring storms, some are believed to protect, some are described as monsters, and some seem to appear just before something terrible happens. Tonight, we are talking about the winged things. Welcome to The Hollow Between, a podcast of folklore, ghost stories, and the uncanny. I'm Candace, and tonight, beside the lantern light, I have a story for you. So settle in with a blanket and a cup of something warm, because tonight we are looking toward the sky. Perhaps the most unsettling thing about winged creatures is they appear where we think nothing should be able to hide. Not beneath the water, not deep in the forest, not locked behind a door, but above us, in open air, against the moon, across the clouds, and yet somehow they vanish. A glimpse of wings, a dark shape moving too quickly, eyes reflecting headlights from somewhere above the road, a shadow crossing the stars, and then nothing. Only the question left behind: what did I see? One of the most famous winged legends in American folklore is Mothman. The sightings most often associated with Mothman began in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966. Witnesses describe a strange man-sized creature with wings, an unsettling shape, and glowing red eyes. Some said it flew after their car. Others connected sightings to an abandoned World War II era area outside of town known locally as the TNT area. The name Mothman would eventually become legendary, but the earliest descriptions were uncertain. People struggled to explain what they had seen. A bird, a man, a creature, something. And that uncertainty is part of what makes the story endure. In December of 1967, tragedy struck Point Pleasant when the Silver Bridge collapsed into the Ohio River during rush hour. 46 people died. Afterward, many people began connecting the Mothman sightings to the disaster. Was the creature a warning, an omen, a messenger? Or were people trying to make meaning from a terrifying event by looking backward and finding signs? That question transformed Mothman from a local strange sighting into modern folklore. Because the Mothman story is not simply about a creature with wings. It's about the fear that something might appear before disaster, that the world may send warnings, and that we may not understand them until it's too late. But not every winged being is a monster. Across many indigenous North American traditions, there are stories of the Thunderbird. I would like to stress that it's important to speak of the Thunderbird with respect. This is not simply a cryptid or a campfire creature. The Thunderbird belongs to living cultural and spiritual traditions, and its meaning varies among different indigenous nations, communities, and families. In many traditions, the Thunderbird is associated with power, storms, thunder, lightning, protection, and the upper world. Its wings bring thunder. Its presence is immense, sacred, more than animal, more than legend, and that matters. Because when we talk about winged beings, we're not always talking about fear. Sometimes we're talking about awe, and sometimes we're talking about protection. Sometimes we're talking about forces larger than human understanding. The sky has always held power, And the Thunderbird reminds us that not every winged thing is something to run from. Some are honored, revered. Some belong to stories much older than the word monster. Then we come to the Jersey Devil, a creature said to haunt the Pine Barrens of New Jersey for more than 2 centuries. The most famous version of the legend begins with a woman known as Mother Leeds. According to folklore, Mother Leeds already had 12 children when she learned she was expecting a 13th. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she is said to have cried out in frustration that the child might as well be a devil. When the baby was born during a stormy night, the story took a darker turn. The child was said to transform before the horrified family. Its body twisted, wings unfurled, hooves replaced feet, and before anyone could stop it, the creature escaped through the chimney and disappeared into the darkness of the Pine Barrens. Over time, the story evolved. Different versions added different details. Some described a horse-like head. Others gave it bat-like wings, claws, or a forked tail. The exact appearance changed depending on who was telling the tale, but the setting remained the same. The Pine Barrens, a vast wilderness of forests, swamps, and sandy roads stretching across southern New Jersey. It's the sort of place where stories feel at home. Fog drifting between the trees, lonely roads, strange sounds carrying through the darkness. Places where it's easy to imagine something watching from just beyond sight. For generations, residents reported hearing unearthly screams in the woods or catching glimpses of a winged figure moving between the trees. And whether those sightings were real, imagined, or something in between, the Jersey Devil became woven into the identity of the region itself. The creature no longer belonged to a single story. It belonged to the landscape, to the roads, the forests, to the feeling of being alone in the Pine Barrens after dark. In Maryland folklore, there's another strange winged creature, the Snallygaster. The Snallygaster is one of the more unusual creatures in American legend. It's been described as part bird, part reptile, part dragon, and part nightmare. Some accounts give it wings, claws, a beak, tentacles, or a single eye. The details vary wildly, which definitely makes the creature much more unsettling. It doesn't settle neatly into just one shape. The Snallygaster is often connected to German immigrant folklore in Maryland, particularly in the region around Frederick County. Its name is sometimes linked to Old German words suggesting a quick ghost or quick spirit. Like many folkloric creatures, it may have begun as a warning story, a way to keep children close to home, a way to explain strange sounds in the night, a way to give shape to fear. And yet, the Snallygaster became something larger, a piece of local identity, a creature people recognized even if they had never seen it. That is the strange magic of folklore. A thing does not have to appear often to be remembered. Sometimes it only has to be named. Across the ocean in Cornwall, England, there is the legend of the Owlman of Cornwall. While whispers of a strange winged creature near the village can be tracked back to the 1920s, the story gained wider attention when reports began circulating of a large owl-like humanoid seen near the church in Cornwall. Witnesses described something feathered and man-sized, something with broad wings, glowing eyes, and a silhouette that seemed wrong against the evening sky. Perhaps it was just an owl. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Whatever people saw, the image endured, a winged figure watching from the old stone church above the trees. Owls already carry a heavy weight in folklore. Across many cultures, they've been seen as messengers, omens, guides, watchers, and sometimes harbingers of death. They move silently. They see in the darkness. And they turn their heads in ways that feel completely unnatural. So perhaps it's no surprise that when people imagine something winged and uncanny, the owl is never far away. Farther still, in stories from parts of Zambia, the Congo, and the surrounding regions, there is the Kongamato. The Kongamato is often described as a reddish, leathery-winged creature resembling a bat or a prehistoric flying reptile. Its name is sometimes translated as breaker of boats or overturner of boats, and some stories connect it to rivers, swamps, and remote waterways. Descriptions often include membranous wings, a long beak, and an aggressive nature. To outside listeners, the Kongamato may sound like a pterosaur from another age, but what matters for this episode is not proving what it is. What matters is the persistence of its story, the idea that something winged lives in remote places, something that doesn't merely fly overhead, but interferes with human passage. Something that appears where river, forest, and sky meet. In Indonesia, particularly in stories associated with Java, there is the Ahool. The Ahool is often described as a giant bat-like creature, though some accounts imagine it as something stranger. Its name is said to come from its cry, a sound carrying through the rainforest at night. The creature is often associated with jungle valleys, rivers, and dense canopy, places where the sky is visible only in fragments. That setting alone makes the legend powerful. Imagine standing in a humid forest after dark, the trees crowded above you, the air alive with insects, and somewhere overhead, something enormous moves through the branches. You don't see it clearly. You only hear its cry, and then beating of wings. And in Papua New Guinea, stories of the Ropen describe a flying creature sometimes associated with glowing lights in the night sky. Some modern cryptid accounts imagine the Ropen as pterosaur-like. Others suggest large bats, birds, or misidentified natural phenomena. However, the haunting detail is not the exact shape. It's the light, the idea of something flying in darkness and glowing as it moves. A living lantern above the trees. A strange brightness crossing the sky where no aircraft should be. A light that appears briefly, then disappears. Perhaps that's why we keep telling stories about them. Because when something crosses the sky, we can't help but look up. And when it disappears before we can understand it, we're left wondering whether it came to threaten us or to warn us. Across cultures and centuries, winged creatures have appeared as warnings, guardians, omens, and mysteries. Some were feared. Some were revered, and some left behind only a sign that they had passed through. A shadow, a cry in the darkness, a single feather where no feather should be. I invite you to settle in a little closer to the lantern light. Listen for the wind beyond the window, And if you hear something moving overhead tonight, perhaps don't look up. Tonight's story is called The Feather on the Porch. The first feather appeared after a storm. Daniel Whitaker found it early on a Sunday morning, lying across the boards of his front porch. At first, he thought it belonged to a raven. There were plenty in the pines behind his house. But when he picked it up, he realized it was far too large, nearly the length of his forearm. Black at the tip, fading into a strange deep gray near the quill. Not quite brown and not quite blue. A color that seemed to change when he turned it in the light. The feather was beautiful, yet wrong. Daniel stood there in his slippers, coffee cooling in his hand, staring at it. Then he noticed something else. The feather was warm, not sun-warmed. The morning was cool, and a rainstorm had only just passed. The porch boards were damp. The railing glittered with rain, but the feather carried a faint, living warmth, as though it had only just fallen. Daniel lived alone at the edge of Briar County, where the paved road became gravel and the forest began climbing into the hills. He was not an easily frightened man. At 62, he had lived long enough to distrust both panic and coincidence. So he took the feather inside, set it on the kitchen table, and looked up local birds. Hawk, turkey vulture, bald eagle, owl. But nothing matched. This feather was too large, too dark, too strange. Eventually, he placed it on the mantel and told himself he had found something unusual. 3 days later, the creek flooded. Not badly, not enough to make the news beyond the county, but enough to wash out the old bridge on Miller Road. A school bus usually crossed that bridge every morning at 7:10. That day, for reasons no one could explain, the driver had taken a different route, a detour, a feeling, a whim. Whatever saved them, saved them. Everyone called it luck. Daniel did too, at first. The second feather appeared in July. This one lay on the porch swing, and it was longer than the first, darker. The quill curved slightly as if shaped by a hand. Daniel found it before dawn. The air smelled of rain, though no rain had fallen. And again, the feather was warm. There were no tracks on the porch, no droppings, no sign of an animal, only just the feather. That afternoon, lightning struck the old church steeple during a sudden storm. The fire department arrived quickly and the damage was contained. Luckily, no one was inside. Except, according to the pastor, there should have been. Choir rehearsal had been scheduled for 4 o'clock. It was canceled 15 minutes before the lightning struck because the organist's car wouldn't start. Another accident avoided. Another story people told for a few days before moving on. But Daniel didn't move on. He placed the second feather beside the first. Then he closed his curtains before darkness fell. By autumn, Daniel began to understand the pattern. The feathers came before something happened. Not always something terrible, not always something obvious. A feather appeared the morning before a missing child was found asleep in a deer blind 3 miles from their home. Another appeared before a fire started in the dry grass behind the hardware store and was extinguished minutes before reaching the propane tanks. One appeared the night before old Mrs. Keller died peacefully in her sleep. That feather was smaller, softer, gray at the edges. Daniel didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful, but both felt appropriate. Daniel told no one for nearly a year. Who would have believed him? A man living alone in the woods begins finding mysterious feathers before local tragedies and near misses. It sounded like something people would smile about politely, then whisper over coffee at the diner. So Daniel just kept the feathers. He labeled each one with the date. He wrote down what happened afterwards. Not because he understood, but because he didn't. And sometimes writing things down is the only way to keep from doubting your own memory. The 7th feather arrived in winter. Daniel found it stuck upright in the snow beside his porch steps, perfectly vertical as though placed there. This feather was pale at the base and dark at the tip. Frost clung to its edges, but when Daniel touched it, the frost melted immediately beneath his fingers. The feather was warm. They were always warm. That night, Daniel heard something on the roof. Not scratching, not footsteps, not claws, but a weight, a presence, something enormous settling above him. He sat upright in bed. The house was silent. The furnace clicked on. Wind moved through the trees. Then the ceiling creaked, slowly. He held his breath. The sound didn't move. Whatever was above him was not pacing or searching or restless. It was simply there, waiting. Daniel did not sleep. At dawn, he climbed the attic ladder and found nothing. No hole in the roof, no broken shingles, no animal nest, only a single dark feather wedged beneath the attic vent, inside the house. He stared at it for a long time before removing it. This feather was different. It was longer, heavier, and when he held it, he felt something pass through him that was not fear exactly. It was more like recognition, as though the feather belonged to something that had always existed just beyond the edge of sight, something older than the county, older than the church, older than the roads that cut through the hills. After that, Daniel began watching the sky. He watched at dawn, at sunset, before and after storms. He saw hawks, vultures, geese, owls, and ravens, but nothing large enough to leave those feathers, nothing strange enough, nothing that made the air feel charged and expectant. Then, in late spring, his neighbor's son came to his house. The boy's name was Luke, and he was 17 years old. He stood on the porch holding one of the feathers in both of his hands. "I found this by our barn," he said. Daniel looked at it, and his stomach tightened. The feather was black, almost iridescent, and longer than any of the ones he had found before. "When?" Daniel asked. "This morning. Did anything happen?" Luke shook his head. Daniel almost told him everything. He almost invited him inside, showed him the mantle, the feathers, the labels, the notebook. Instead, he asked, "Where are your parents?" "At work," Luke said. "Go home," Daniel said. Luke frowned. "Why?" "Just go home and stay there until they get back." Something in Daniel's voice must have convinced the boy, because he left without arguing. An hour later, the tornado siren sounded. It wasn't a large tornado, not by the standards of places that see them often, but Briar County rarely did. The tornado came over the ridge with almost no warning. It tore through the field behind Luke's house, lifted the roof from the barn, snapped 3 trees, and then vanished into the hills. The house remained untouched, and so did Luke. Afterward, he told his parents that Daniel had warned him. Daniel said he had seen the weather turning. No one questioned it. Not then. After that, people began bringing feathers to Daniel. Quietly, without ceremony. A woman from the diner left one on his porch wrapped in a dish towel. A farmer brought one in the bed of his truck. A child found one in the schoolyard after a thunderstorm. Each feather was slightly different, but each one impossibly large, and each one warm. Each one was followed by something, sometimes disaster, and sometimes deliverance. Often both tangled together so tightly, Daniel could not tell which mattered more. A tree fell across an empty road minutes after a cyclist passed. A roof collapsed during the night after the family had gone out for ice cream. A baby was born early in the backseat of a car that had stopped because something dark and winged crossed the road ahead of them. No one saw it clearly. No one ever did. By the second year, Daniel no longer believed the feathers were warnings. Well, not exactly, because warnings give instruction. Run, hide, turn back, but the feathers did not explain themselves. They simply arrived, like announcements, like markers, like the world was taking a breath before something changed, and that somehow was worse. Because a warning suggests you can prevent what comes. An omen only tells you that something is already on its way. The largest feather appeared on a night without storms. Daniel woke sometime after midnight. At first, he didn't know what had disturbed him. The house was dark, the air was still. Then he felt it, the weight. Something was on the roof. Daniel lay very still. Above him, the ceiling groaned once, not from movement, but from pressure, as though something vast had settled there and was folding itself into the shape of the house. Daniel rose slowly. He didn't turn the lights on. He walked through the hallway, down the stairs, and opened the front door. The yard was quiet. The trees stood black and motionless. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed two feathers caught in the rain gutter, still moving slightly, though there was no wind. Daniel stepped off the porch and looked up. For a moment, the roof line seemed wrong. It was too high, too jagged. Then, part of the darkness unfolded. It didn't rise, it didn't jump, but it unfolded, like a shape detaching itself from the roof. It was immense and silent. Its wings opened against the sky, vast enough to block out the stars above the house. Daniel saw no face, no beak, no claws, only the impression of something old and feathered and impossibly large, something that carried the night with it. It launched itself into the air without a sound, and for one breath, it crossed the moon. Then it was gone beyond the pines. Daniel remained standing in the yard until dawn. The feather on the porch the following morning was nearly as long as Daniel's arm. He hadn't noticed it the night before. The yard had been dark, and his attention had been fixed on the impossible thing unfolding above the roofline. Now it lay across the porch boards as though it had been placed there deliberately. Black along the edges, gray near the center, and white at the quill. Daniel stood at the screen door for a long moment before stepping outside. Even from several feet away, he could tell it was different. Not simply larger, but heavier somehow, more significant. When he finally knelt beside it, he felt warmth radiating from the feather into the cool morning air, warmer than any of the others, much warmer than it should have been. He didn't touch it. Instead, he listened. No birds sang. No cars passed on the road. Even the wind seemed absent. The trees stood motionless beyond the yard, and in that strange silence, Daniel understood something he could not have explained. This feather was different not because of its size, but because of the quiet surrounding it. For 3 days, nothing happened. The town went on, the diner opened, children rode bicycles down Maple Street, the church bell rang at noon, people mowed lawns, they bought groceries, and complained about the heat. Daniel watched all of it with a growing sense of dread, and by the fourth day he began to wonder if perhaps he had been wrong. Then, just after 3 p.m., the sky turned green. The storm that followed was remembered for decades, not because it was the strongest storm Briar County had ever seen, but because of what it spared. The tornado touched down north of town and moved directly toward the elementary school, where a summer program had kept nearly 60 children inside later than usual. Then, for reasons meteorologists later struggled to explain, the storm shifted abruptly and violently. It turned east, cutting through empty fields, destroying 2 abandoned barns, and lifting before it reached the highway. No one died. No one was seriously injured. People called it a miracle. Daniel stood on his porch that evening, watching clouds move apart above the hills, and for the first time he wondered if the creature brought disaster or held it back. Years passed, and Daniel grew older. The feathers came less often, but they still came, always before turning. A fire avoided, a death softened, a storm diverted, a child found, a bridge closed hours before collapse. And then slowly, the town stopped speaking of them as strange. They became part of local weather, part of Briar County life. If a feather appeared, people paid attention. They checked on neighbors, they stayed home, they watched the sky, and they listened. No one knew what left the feathers, and no one knew what it wanted, or if it even wanted anything at all. But sometimes, late at night, when rain tapped softly against the windows, people claimed they could feel something passing overhead. Not flying, just watching. Daniel died in his sleep in early November at the age of 81. The next morning, his porch was covered in feathers, dozens of them, black, gray, white, long and dark and soft as smoke. They lay across the steps, the railing, the swing, and the yard. Every one of them was warm. The town gathered quietly, and no one spoke for a long time. Then Luke, grown by then with children of his own, stepped forward and picked up the largest feather. He looked toward the roof, then toward the sky. And although the morning was clear, thunder sounded once beyond the hills, low and distant, almost gentle. People in Briar County still find feathers from time to time, after storms, before fires, on porches, in fields, caught in gutters, resting on windowsills. They are always too large and always warm. And when they do, they pause. They call their families. They check the weather. They look toward the sky. Because no one knows whether the thing above Briar County is a monster, a guardian, or something older than either word. No one knows why it comes, and no one knows what it sees. Only that somewhere beyond the clouds, something immense moves silently through the dark. And now and then, it leaves a feather behind. Friends, perhaps that's why stories of winged creatures endure. Not because we believe every sighting, Not because we can explain every shadow crossing the moon, but because the sky has always felt like a place of messages. Storms gather there, birds migrate, stars appear, and sometimes when we're frightened or grieving or standing at the edge of change, we look upward, as though some part of us still expects an answer. Across cultures and centuries, winged beings have carried many meanings: warning, power, protection, terror, and wonder. They remind us that not everything above is distant. Some things may be watching, some things may be passing through, and some things may arrive only long enough to leave a sign, a cry in the dark, a shadow over the road, a feather on the porch. Please send your stories to thehollowbetween@gmail.com. Perhaps your story might be shared here beside the lantern light. And if you've been enjoying The Hollow Between, I would be so grateful if you followed the podcast and shared it with someone who loves folklore, ghost stories, and the uncanny as much as we do. Currently, we are on Spotify and YouTube. Word of mouth truly helps keep little lanterns like this burning and helps this strange little community continue to grow. Thank you so much for spending this evening with me. And until next time, mind the hollow between.